So yeah, I really think that there's some viable room here to explore where attention is also the process of creation, essentially. Like it is the process of shaping your experience and moving you from a state of chaos to a state of, and we're back.
Back again, brother. How you doing?
Great, man. I think that's the routine now. Um, okay, so today I wanted to talk about spirits. What is a spirit? What is spiritualism? Maybe how that relates to the sacred act of creation as well as the profane act of creation and attention. And so I'm going to start with spirits and creation and then pause and give you some room before moving into attention. So, spirit, kind of woo woo sometimes, right? Like, I think that a contemporary understanding of spirit is something like a ghost, something immaterial, non physical. Yet, we also understand that ghosts, demons, spirits are things that can interact with the physical world and possess you. And so, that's a religious way of thinking about it that we seem not to have dispensed with. But in some sense, we still also think of spirits as something the opposite of the body. And in doing some research, I found that one of the, I guess, Greek words for spirit is pneuma, and pneuma is roughly equivalent to the wind or the breath or an animating principle. And that made me think about how ancient people thought, let's say, phenomenologically in terms of their own experience. And so, from their perspective, let's say 3,000 years ago, when they would see the wind moving objects around them, the trees or something, they experienced an unseen force that was causing change in the world. And so, to me, that makes sense how a spirit can be associated with uh, wind. And then you could also imagine how when something's alive, like an animal or another human being, it's breathing, and then when it's dead, it's no longer breathing. And so this makes sense to me again that we would have associated breath with an animating force that again can take possession of a body. So those are all the things I think about when I think of spirit. And I'll pause there before going into the creation stories because it's interesting how many creation stories, or at least the two that I'm thinking of with Marduk and then in the Old Testament, have something to do with spirit as an integral element in creation.
Yeah. So for me, it's an interesting thing because, like you said, spirit is a bit abstract, and so you can break it. You can break the human or this reality into three or four pieces, right? So you can either break it into the mind, the body, and the spirit or soul, or you can separate the spirit and the soul into two different things and get four instead of three pieces. And so, like ideally, when we think about most people's idea of the Trinity, you're thinking about the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so, this is supposed to be your mind, body, and soul in some way. And a lot of times, what we would say is that the spirit is the part that's closest to God, ideally, and then the soul would be this part that's closest to you. This is where that little balance is. That's just my interpretation of it. I can't give you anywhere of like where that comes from. That's just kind of how I think about it. And so what am I saying there? I'm saying that the spirit or the breath is something that, like you said, is the animation, it's the aliveness of a thing. It's something that we don't necessarily control when it comes and goes. That's why they say like it's up to God when I live or die. You know, that's kind of where that idea comes from. And then the soul is the imprint of your mind and body onto that spirit. It's like the layer that kind of like it's the buffer layer. It's where you kind of really exist at. It's the soul of a person. That's the you is. And those things kind of exist in counterparts. So you would say that, to not make this too complicated, that the spirit and soul are in essence the center of a being, right? And so I guess to me, when I think of spirit, I just think of it as the essence of you. Like if plants have essences, the essence of a person is their spirit. And everything that is, like you said, animated has a spirit that connects it to the source. And so ideally this like silver cord idea that you have from astral travel is this connection to source or connection to truth, which is the spirit, which is a breath that's breathed into humanity or that was given. That's even when you think about like what is it like what's the word? CPR. When you give somebody CPR, you're breathing into them to reanimate them. You know what I'm saying? You're allowing the breath to move through the body by pushing the water out, however you want to perceive it. That's kind of the best way I can break it down without bringing in too many other mythologies or things of that nature.
Yeah, yeah. So just pausing a moment too to kind of reiterate what, at least how I understand, we might interpret how the ancients viewed the world through a phenomenological lens. And phenomenology is just the study of experience, essentially. Um, and what seems to have happened over the thousands of years that we've been trying to do whatever it is we're doing when we're formulating religious mythologies and rituals and dramas and stories is we seem to be figuring out how to act. We seem to be figuring out ourselves and something like that. And for whatever reason, we have conjured up these different notions, categories, ideas, at least in written form, that describe or are attempts at describing and capturing these experiences, but then we use them for other purposes, right? And so again, we're talking about spirit, we're talking about pneuma. It's like it would seem reasonable that most people thousands of years ago had an experience of wind and breath, and that meant something to them, and they knew that. But then it eventually became more abstract and elaborated into, well, the wind must come from somewhere, and because it's unseen, there must also be a spiritual realm or a realm of the unseen or the a realm of forces that we can't perceive but still intercede in our lives. And then today we have again this notion of spirit that we use. I'm thinking back through examples of kind of common examples of just how we use it, where if you think of the spirit of a basketball team or the spirit of a business, I think you kind of alluded to it. It's the through line, right? Like the spirit is the thing that organizes everybody in the business to be oriented towards the same end. And without skipping too far ahead to attention and what spirit means in a more cognitive science parlance, it's like, well, is the spirit the same thing as a purpose? Is it the same thing as a goal?
It's more of the aligning principle. You see, so like think of it this way. So like if we're all fractals of source, right? And a part of that being fractal of source means that we're connected back to it or that we're returning to it. So the idea here is that the reality that we live in is an emanation of source. So it's source stretched out. And so we're in the phase of returning back to it. And so the spirit overall goal is to return back to itself. So we're all trying to connect back to this similar idea. And we're slowly minimizing the amount of extracurricular ideas and paths that are necessary for us to walk. So spirit is that alignment with the truth, actually, to me.
Hmm.
And that's why I say that the spirit represents the source part of you because it's the part of you that remains with you that is still connected to source. So it's the reminder of truth. It's the reminder of stillness. It's the call home, as they would call it in a lot of cultures.
Here's another example, and maybe this kind of echoes what you're saying. So imagine a father who is acting out the role of a father, right? It's interesting we have this concept, we have this category of a father. And a father does certain things. Father looks a certain way and has certain rituals and whatever it is that enables other human beings to identify a cluster of behaviors or a cluster of people and to say that this is a father or these are our fathers. That idea of being a father is something that didn't originate in the present. It's something that has been passed down to us. It also transcends any singular instance of a father, and it also will likely outlive current human beings, such that it's so, in a sense, the spirit of a father or the spirit of the father is very similar to whatever it is that enables us to recognize fathers as such. And so now I'm beginning to connect the idea of spirit with the idea of identity and recognition. But again, to your point, I'm trying to connect it with the fact that there's some through line that, again, enables us to, because what you could imagine, you and I, before we have children, we're not fathers, but we have an understanding of what a father is, right? And then when we become a father, we will likely embody some of that knowledge that we had from our fathers, from what we've learned about fathers, from other people, and then we'll pass that on, and so on and so forth. And so, okay, what do you think about that idea of, as an example, when it comes to father, the spirit of the father kind of being similar to the idea of the father or the identity of the father?
So let's put it this way. So, like you said, some people you'll notice these certain qualities of a father without necessarily knowing that they're a father, right? Is what you're saying. And so with that, what you're saying is that there's an aspect of alignment with truth that is unavoidable. So like the idea here is that if you're aligned with spirit and you're in the position that you're supposed to be in, you're gonna act a certain way. You're gonna have certain qualities that you have. Like we know the qualities of a good and a bad father. Like you can see certain dudes and be, and if you know they have kids, you're like, oh, you're probably a shit father. Like you're probably not keeping up with the kids if you're not orderly in a way that like, or you're not managing spaces well, or whatever it may be. And some people have the qualities to do that thing. And so the idea here is that mm, the people that you notice for doing the thing are in alignment with the truth of that identity, right? And like I said, we're slowly reducing the amount of identities that we need as we shrink back in from this emanation. And so what we're identifying is that there are certain archetypes that are a part, or like you said, that are so part of this reality that they don't really go away. These things are true. They're necessary. Like you said, that being a father is something that's not just a human thing. If you look at fathers in other species, they almost have similar behaviors. If you look at mothers in other species, they have similar behaviors because it's a part of the structure itself. It's not necessarily just limited to us. It's a part of the archetypical balance that's needed in the reality for things to proliferate.
Hmm. Okay, okay. Now let me bring in creation with with the spirit, just to try to complicate things more. So there's one creation story from the Enuma Elish, which I think is the Mesopotamian myth. I don't exactly understand. I'm sure they have multiple myths, and this is just one of them. I think I will learn. But yes, that's one story. It's a Mesopotamian story, right? And just shortening it, the central hero is Marduk, and Marduk has four eyes that can perceive everything and can scan everything. Basically, he can pay attention to whatever he needs to pay attention to. He has a great faculty for attention. And then he also speaks magic words. And so he can create and destroy just by talking, which this guy is pretty amazing, right? And if I understand my history, as a side note, these stories are older than the Egyptian stories, and they're also older than the Old Testament stories. I don't know, right? Maybe, yeah,
From my understanding, yeah.
right, right, okay. And so as we the next story I tell will be the Old Testament one, and you'll see the echoes of that. But Marduk is elected hero of the gods, essentially, to go and defeat Tiamat, the watery serpent of chaos. Um, and as he's fighting her, he catches her in a net, blows wind into her, and I think shoots an arrow into her as well. And then he cuts her up into pieces and creates the world out of her, right? And so you have the hero who's facing chaos. You have the hero who can speak magic words and pays attention, who uses wind in part to defeat chaos and then differentiate it into habitable order. I'm going to pause there before going to the Old Testament.
So there's there's so much with that story because what you're really saying is that in some aspect, great attention and command of language will allow you the ability to create a world, to master and order chaos to create a world. And so when I like to look at mythology, it's all about being able to unpack the subtle themes here. Like, so it's not about necessarily what's happening, but what do these things imply is possible if you have these abilities? And let's look at how you're able to pull out these different things from it. You'll be able to pull out the factor of attention and the power to create and destroy with the tongue. And if you go into the Old Testament, different things, we can pull out these same things of how these things are being used and said by God to be valuable. And so what we're really talking about here is that there's a very you're amazed at what you can do in a chaotic situation with attention and control and order. And and we really look at the explanation of what about the language that Marduk used that's important, or what about language that creates and destroys. It's the idea of knowing mm, the vibrations of language. Like there's certain words that are lost to our side of humanity, but were known to that version of humanity that had the ability to literally create and destroy. And so there's this aspect of having a more in-depth understanding of the world around them in order to master the things that they needed to, even if it seemed unsurmountable.
And one of the things that I wanted to pick up on is the notion of the world. And there's a few ways you can think of what reality is and what your world is. One of the ways is to think of it experientially, where your world is that which you experience. Only later, after you've experienced something, do you think that it's subjective or objective or physical or abstract, but initially it's experienced. And William James, one of the founders of pragmatism and one of the founders of psychology, he said that before you even attend to the world, what you engage with is something like a chaotic experience. And he used that word, chaos, right? He used that phrase, a chaotic experience. And when I first read that, I was like, man. So, so when I think about creation, it's like, what if what the Mesopotamians and I don't know, maybe many other communities were trying to illustrate in their creation myths is the process of engaging with experience every day, all the time, right? And bring in
Mhm.
bring in the Old Testament real quick. It's like what does God do? He's contending with the what's it called? The tohu vabohu, the watery chaos that's there, and he uses the logos, the word, to then create order. And then human beings are made in that image. It's like I think that's what they were getting at.
And then even like when you look at it from this perspective, like I like the way that you're framing it here because it opens up the door to say, so what if there's an aspect of language and breath and understanding that's required for you to see the world actually? And that's what they're referencing. And so when we look at a lot of this and what I like to think about is we talk about the hero's journey. We've kind of lost it in a lot of the last conversations, but I want to bring it back here in the aspect of people miss that the hero's journey is just a walk through your understanding. So a lot of these things we're talking about, the things that they needed to keep the world together, mind you, you had to have the attention and the word, and then you had the chaos to order it, right? So technically, could he not have just been naming everything? Therefore, he's creating and destroying it by naming it, by understanding it, by having a by creating some level of knowledge around it via the word, via language. And so there's this aspect of us having the ability to create our worlds, and we miss that sometimes with these creation stories. Is they're explaining to you the things that you need to pay attention to have a full grasp of the reality around you.
Right. I think they're talking about the process of engaging with reality as such that we do all the
Mhm.
time. What I think they were talking about learning. And my sense is that this isn't a reductive view of it. I just think, like, again, many of the ways that we think now, in terms of the words we use, the language, the categories, they just didn't have them back then. Like we are so privileged to be able to think in terms of psychology and the mind, the body, and biology and science and all of these things. Even if you want to go the more religious route in theology, we've had just more time and more technology and you know, maybe we can get into what AI does to this, but they didn't think the way that we think. And if you assume a kind of linear progressive path from them to us, then in some sense, it's like the primordial way of thinking is similar to how children think today, where like they they're not blank slates, right? Where they're born with nothing in their mind and then they completely generate their knowledge from the outside world of experience. No, like you mentioned before, we're born with archetypal systems and spirits that bias us to experience and attend to the world in a certain way. But there's still a whole lot more that we have to figure out. And so when a child, I think I used this example last time, sees a dog, they might not know what that is for the first time. They will need some sort of help in terms of formulating into an ordered knowledge structure to say, like, okay, that's a dog, right? And like you said, name it. And then when you name it, this is an oversimplification, but then when you encounter another dog, you could say, oh, those are the same thing. I wasn't afraid of the last dog. Why do I need to be afraid of this dog? They both have four legs. Right? And so,
Yeah, but see, and then I think the important part that builds on where you were going in that direction is realizing that, okay, as a society, once we establish that and we see all the things that we thought was dogs, and we're like, oh wait, that one tail different. It don't act the same. Oh, that's a cat. You know what I'm saying? And so as a society, we've slowly began to get more and more knowledge. And what a lot of times we fail to realize is we're still not a level one civilization yet. We don't know what everything on this planet does or is. We don't. We haven't mastered everything here yet. We haven't even really mastered each other yet and what we truly are. We're not getting everything we can get out of the planet that we live on. And so I forget what the guy's name is, but he has a scale for it where it's like level 0, level 1, level 2, level 3, level civilization. And so like in order to be level 1, you have to be extracting all the energy from this planet and using it efficiently. We're not doing that. We're technically not even a level 1 civilization as humanity yet, on the scale that humans created. So there's still a lot for us to learn. And so in the process of that, I think that we're constantly still in the midst of the creation process.
yes, I think, I think we're always, and I think we'll forever be in the midst of it because you brought up the hero's journey before. I also think the hero's journey is a description of learning. If a child is very familiar with dogs. And what does that mean, familiar, right? It's not unknown, it's not chaotic, it's ordered, it's predictable. I know this is a dog. And then the child approaches another animal that he thinks is a dog, but there's differences, like you mentioned. And the differences, the mismatch between what I thought this thing is and what it actually is, that's chaos. That's the unknown. That's on a very rudimentary level, the anxiety provoking experience of a mismatch between your knowledge structure and reality that produces learning, because now I have to either change how I look at the animal, and this is what would be confirmation bias. It's like, oh well, it's a dog, it's fine, it's cool, I'm just gonna keep telling myself it's a dog. Or you have to generate a new knowledge structure that's now cat. And you have something different, and you're continuously going through that process, but the learning, generally speaking, only occurs when there's something new, when there's something that you haven't experienced before, which is the dragon.
Yeah, and I think so for me, the idea of like what is the goal of like spiritual knowledge to me? The goal of spiritual knowledge is to get a good enough variety of understanding of the category of things to where you can identify something enough to not be freaked out by it. That's where peace comes in. So what is spiritual peace? It's mean I have enough categories to where I can identify something enough to not be afraid of it. And then I can work from there. And the faster you are at identifying something with truth, the better you are and the more happier your life is most of the time. The better you are at identifying what something actually is and how you should react to it in that moment, the better you are. The more likely that you need a tool or something that you may not have, the more likely you are to run into stress and anxiety.
And now bringing attention back into this, I guess explicitly, I can't help but think that there is this connection between spirit and attention, because to the degree that spirit played a role in creation in both Marduk's case and in the Old Testament God's case, what do we do when we pay attention? You you order experience, essentially. William James, I mentioned before, you first encounter a chaotic experience, and then he said that after your habits of attention essentially manifest, then you know whatever it is that you're dealing with. And so for him, experience and attention were deeply connected. And so when you're attending to something, you're foregrounding some information and you're backgrounding others. You're making some things salient and relevant, and then you're saying that some other things are irrelevant and you just don't care about it. Even with, uh, let's say, the dog and the cat example, it's like when you're only looking at the dog, for various reasons, there are some things that pop out as salient to you, right? The dog has teeth, the dog has four legs, it has a tail, has fur, ears, and eyes, but you aren't fully investigating every inch of the dog, right? Like it's more like you see a shape and you kind of fill it in enough until you're like, okay, I got it. That's all I care about. And so, yeah, I really think that there's some viable room here to explore where attention is also the process of creation, essentially. Like it is the process of shaping your experience and moving you from a state of chaos to a state of order.
So I'll put it this way, like, so if the spirit is the dweller, it's the observer in the body, right? It's the thing that's actually paying the attention, right? Because what's paying attention in you? Is it your mind? No, your mind is just recording the data. It's not reading the data. What's reading the data for you? You know what I'm saying? Like, what's the actual thing that keeps you? Like, if you believe that there is a life outside of this, there has to be reporting back to something. This is the whole silver cord. This is the spirit. This is your soul. That thing, it isn't judging. It's the stillness within you, right? And so the idea here is there's almost a buffer layer between the spirit and the mind where creation happened, right? This is the attention itself. Like you choosing to pay attention to what the information your soul choosing to pay attention to the information your mind is giving it, then creates the language and the words and the thoughts that explain the experience itself, right? So, like you said, there's a line between that attention and the experience itself, where there's a processor there, because the mind is what processes the experience to give the soul the information to have it, that experience. So, like, if you look, and this is like just like observing it objectively, like we're not trying to overly harsh over what these things are and aren't, but like realistically, think about it. How does if there's like a buffer layer, what order do these things happen in? So you have your mind. Your mind is a physical thing. We've already have scientific data that your heart neurons pick up on what's going on around you before your mind does. So there's an auric field around you that's collecting data that reports to the heart, that reports to the mind, that reports to the soul, which is sitting and observing all of this, right? Or the spirit, right? The animation itself, right? But that's just God, right? This is where it gets funny, right? Because this is all just a reflection of self. So what am I saying? To not make it too complicated. What I'm saying is, what does creation, intention, experience, and spirit all have in common? They all happen at the same place and get data at different levels. So the spirit is the thing that came first because the spirit is necessary for attention to be directed, right? Because you need to have a spirit, of animation, in order to animate a body. Once the body is animated, it has the tools in order to pay attention. Because the spirit can't pay attention. It doesn't have a body to pay attention. It doesn't have eyes, ears, nose. It doesn't have an auric field. Well, it does have an auric field, but it doesn't use it in that way. Because observation is a human response for security. So I feel like I'm rambling, but I want to get to the point. The idea here is that so spirit, heart, mind, reality. So spirit in essence is getting its information from the heart. And then the mind is observing the external in order to try to create an idea of what it perceives as the experience as relation to that information. Sense. But so your mind records the experience. Your heart feels the experience. And then your soul or spirit takes that data and records it in a way, is what I'm saying.
Hmm.
But the experience itself is defined at the mental level based off of what your mind has tools to use, what tools your mind has, whether it's language, experiential data, whatever it may have, culture, to put that experience within a lens for you to try to understand it mentally. The heart just gets a general vibration of what it feels like to be doing the thing.
Do you think of the heart as a kind of another brain?
It has neurons. They say the body has three brains: the heart, the brain that we know, and then the stomach. They all carry neurons that process information.
Hmm.
And so that's why you have a gut feeling. They have listen to your heart, and then you have your mind or your conscious. Your
Like
conscious would technically be the spirit. So those are the four thinking parts of the body. You have the spirit, the heart, the mind, and the stomach.
you associate the spirit with consciousness?
Yeah, it's the like you said, it's the animating force. It's what is paying the attention.
Hmm. I don't think I've thought of that spirit as consciousness. I think
Because like you said, when the spirit leaves the body is no longer animated, right?
Mhm.
So it is the consciousness. It's the vehicle of consciousness.
Well, I guess you could be alive and unconscious
Mhm.
and still have your
Spirit.
spirit. I was just thinking about the second creation story in the Old Testament, where I think I've always thought that prior to Adam and Eve eating the apple and having the scales fall from their eyes, that weren't conscious in a sense. And then when
Conscious and
this
aware are two different things.
and how would you define that distinction?
Okay, so conscious and aware. So like to be aware you're naked, you need to have context of nakedness. That only comes through language. Like you have to be taught what that is to know what that is. You can be conscious and be alive and be naked, but to be aware of your nakedness, you have to be given context for that. That can only exist within human language because there's no idea for nakedness in nature.
So you're saying that the scales falling from their eyes represents the acquisition of language, perhaps?
The Because they were speaking before ideally, because there's this idea that they spoke with God before this. So there's a certain kind of language that's introduced, a certain culture that was introduced to them. There was some idea that was brought in. So the idea of this here is that, like, for me, when you think about this is gonna sound wacky, but this is the best way I can describe it. So I think of the apple or the knowledge of the fruit of good and evil, or knowledge of good and evil as something like a mushroom. Like you have a mushroom, and this mushroom gives you an experience that's so realistic that you're able to now perceive things differently. This is the idea here, is that there's something that they consumed that gave them experience that shifted how they looked at the world around.
That would be crazy.
You ever heard the stoned ape theory?
I have heard of it. Man, that would be that would be crazy. But going back to consciousness and I guess language and awareness, before they ate, like you said, I believe they were speaking to God. And I also believe Adam was charged with naming the animals prior to him being enlightened. So I always viewed them, I guess, in a kind of childlike unconsciousness prior to the scales falling. And then
But what
this,
is a childlike unconsciousness? They're not indoctrinated into any particular culture.
I could see that. Yeah, I could see that. And then when they develop the awareness of vulnerability or nakedness, to me, this also is associated with the emergence of consciousness because one theory of consciousness is that you're only conscious of things when there's an error in a sense. And maybe there's a distinction to be made between consciousness in terms of experience and awareness, and then there's self-consciousness. But I, I think that there's a reasonable connection there. But anyway, it's interesting that today, most people, you become self-conscious when you make a mistake. If you're speaking publicly, well, that shame and guilt, or perhaps the shame and embarrassment that people start to feel, usually it's like you start stuttering, or it's this inward direction of attention that seems to also be tightly associated with negative emotion. We just don't like that. And I don't know, what does it mean in the story where the scales, prior to the falling of the scales, they didn't have that?
Well, so there's this is we're going into just complete theory territory here, just for anybody that may want to try to clip this. But so ideally, let's look at it from a couple different ways. One, the snake could represent someone that was clothed and they asked what they had on. Something so simple as that. And we also know that when Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden, that they were other people outside of the garden. So what if they just saw someone with clothes on and didn't know? There are a lot of different factors here of what could have happened. You know what I'm saying? Like that's why it's just a story. But ideally for me, what does it say? It says that they began to see the world in a new way because of some experience they had. That's the root cause here. Whether it was eating something, whether it was seeing something, there is an experience that shifted their perception of the world around them in a way so much so that they no longer fit into the world or culture that they were a part of before.
If we draw from archetypal thinking and the story with Marduk, if the snake could represent chaos and novelty, then that's kind of what we've been talking about all along, right? Some new experience, to your point, that radically shifted how they came to know things. And then sticking to the story, the experience seemed to first happen with Eve. And so I wonder if that has some element of femininity there that occurs where speculating as well, maybe it has something to do with childbirth and somehow we maybe became aware of, here's something that just popped into my mind. Maybe it's connected, maybe it's not. But for a while, we didn't associate sex, the act of sex, with birth. In some archaic traditions, the fact that women gave birth just made them goddesses. It was just like, oh, like life comes from you. Like that's amazing. And you could, it's so hard for me to think about what that meant, right? Completely disassociating sex from giving birth. And then at some point, we figured out that, or women figured out that, okay, having sex with men means that I might give birth. And that also does something, again, speculating this, who knows if this happened, like one experience or this took thousands of years to happen, right? And to become something explicit. But the thing is, it happens to Eve first, and then she gives the apple to Adam.
So it's even like looking at it from this perspective. So the idea of like the Sophia story where she decided that she wanted to try to create a child without a consort. And she succeeded at that, but the child was distorted, for lack of a better term. In order to protect this child, she went and created a world for that child. And that's the world that we know to be the world that we exist in. This is the story. This is a whole nother creation myth. And so, but when you look at that though, this is the same thing as Eve going off and creating or doing something that shifted the nature of reality in a way. So I like looking at these different stories because it gives you another way of kind of perceiving what happened necessarily, right? Like even if you look at, I forget what story it is where I can't remember if it's Norse, Greek, or Roman, where the goddess gives the god a stone instead of the child. So she goes and he hides the last child because of the rumor that the child would slay the father. He started eating all the kids. So the mother does something to trick the father into not eating one of the children. He grows up to slay the father. There's so many ideas here of at some point in time the feminine taking action in a way to throw off the balance of whether it was the old gods or the old system and go create something new with a new child that was not really supposed to be here.
From an evolutionary sense, there has been an association also symbolically between women, the feminine, and nature. Because one of the things that nature does is selects who gets to live and keep going. And then that's exactly what women do. And that's been associated with why women have a tendency to make men self-conscious, even today. It's very, for many men, it's intimidating to encounter a woman because initially, generally, what happens is that she's judging you. She's evaluating you for continuation into, the new world, right? And it is interesting how all of those things kind of hang together. I don't exactly know. This could all be wrong. This could all be completely wrong, but it feels like there's something there, which isn't.
It's interesting because when you look at a lot of, like, older history and what people say, a lot of people would argue there's I don't say a large, there's a portion of society that will argue that we came and that humanity started off by a species that was all females, and that they procreated within itself, within the womb, without needing a male counterpart. And that at some point in time, that system was thrown off of balance, and then men came into the picture in order to balance it. So there's an idea here, even with the whole idea that the man's gene is just a broken feminine gene or some nature like that, like the XY chromosome, double X chromosome. I forgot what the story is. Don't make me be a scientist today because I don't want to lie. But in concept here, there's an idea that at some point in time, women could create kids on their own. And that what we understand and what we see from the Mary Magdalene story was a secret sect of women that protected this secret for a time where if they ever just needed to get rid of men or something like that. There's this whole theory behind it. But there's this idea that technically at some point we were optional. And we feel that and we fear that. And that's what created what we see today with the suppression of women in the religion texts and different things of that nature is to not allow that idea to come back into society and destabilize what we consider what we know today as the male ran society.
The image that came to my mind was of the Ouroboros with the dragon that's eating its own tail, and the association with the feminine and chaos, and then chaos with the serpent and the dragon. And
We've trapped the feminine in a lot of occult science. Like if you look at all the occult sciences, it's all about hiding the feminine. Like we could even get into a couple of different things where we talk about how the feminine is venerated in different societies and organizations in a way that's not always publicly spoken about. There's like this idea here that for whatever reason, all these great organizations of men worship women, but don't want everyone to. They want to be the source of the power and then still pulling from this. Like this the idea of like even when the Greeks, so you think about the Sibyls, like a lot of people talk about the Sibyls in the kind of community and how the Sibyls were the key to what the Vatican's power started as. That there was an organization of women called the Sibyls. These were what we know as the oracles of humankind. And that they what we know now as the Vatican and all of their infrastructure was the Sibyl organization and how they ran the world. Everything they know about astrology, all the books they have is supposedly Sibyl knowledge. And so there's just layers to what people believe and what could be true. But a lot of people would argue that like Atlantis and Lemuria were matriarchal societies. They were ran by women. The whole queen off with his head thing, the queen of hearts is supposed to be the reason why that's not advised. The whole Sekhmet killing everybody and needing to drink a river of fake blood as wine to calm her nerves. The chaotic woman, the whole archetype of the chaotic woman is supposed to be a product of the end of this matriarchal civilization where the women had gotten out of line and were tyrannical leaders at some point, and the system had to be restarted because of that.
I know nothing about that, but it sounds it
I just
sounds
that's the
interesting. Yeah,
darkest pocket of like occultism in because I mean when you look at a lot of it, what is Gnosticism? Gnosticism is about the Christ Sophia and what she taught and what that understanding is, and then the Mary Magdalene secrets and whether or not she was a Sybil or what that was, and all of those little things are like you get into like the secrets of all these organizations. It's all about where the feminine aligns and all of this.
and they were all on shrooms. Yep.
And then they say shrooms are what? Shrooms connect you to the mother Gaia. Shrooms are the children of the mother. And so they connect you, or these are the neurons of the planet. You think about how shrooms grow within the planet. These are the neurons of the planet. So these connect you to the mind of the mother.
Crazy. Dog, I think you got about like 10, 15 minutes left. I wanted to kind of shift gears a little bit and just think about wanted to ask if there's anything on your mind that irritates you or annoys you, or a problem that you're trying to solve. We were talking before we got started a little bit about what was it? As our technology is increasing, we need to become more systemic thinkers or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, so what I've been realizing is that we don't realize how easy it is to win because we don't think big enough. That's one thing that's been aggravating me. Like, I do see an opportunity for an immense expansion of intellectual property and how we view property and how we do things and how we create business and how we make money and different things. Like, there's so many different ways. So if there's anything that's aggravating me right now, it's been in the space of trying to establish, I guess, new business norms with what I'm doing as a company. Figuring out how to communicate that in a way that's palatable for people that only know how to consume product.
Mm, mm. Speak of creation, yeah, I know. Stuff. That's like the very
But yeah,
beginning, man. The
it's just trying to get
Mesopotamians,
people to get it.
they uh they they set the groundwork for us, but now look at us. We're creating robots. But it's the same
Bro,
thing.
I think that so even if we wanna just tie it in for the topic of what we've been talking about with that, I've really been looking at this idea of understanding how to build a system that shows us just enough of how everything is ordered so that we don't have to keep rebuilding every time things break. Like, I think as a civilization, it's our job to build structure that outlast us. Like, that's kinda my goal now. Like, I think that's the thing. Like, what is a magnum opus? What is a man's greatest work? Is that I create an idea that can get my family further than I got with what was given to me. Do I create a better structure? How long does it hold? Who are the great men that we know? They're the men that created ideas that keep people going longer than anything else that anybody else had. Jesus isn't Jesus because of just him dying and being born again. Jesus is Jesus because people read them words that they say that he wrote, whether you believe it or not, however you feel about that. He was able to put together words in a way that to this day motivate people to stay alive and keep going and try and be good people. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's an aspect of that work that's valuable. And how do we continue to do that kind of work? And how do we come up with a work that actually unites us so we can use everything that we have here and not scrounge over resources when we have plenty of
I think that's a great question, right? As you were speaking, I was thinking, well, what did we do before, right? Initially, if you want to go as far back to the beginning of life, well, we were embodied organisms that acted. We had modes of being in the world. We had modes of behavior. And if you acted properly, you lived, you kept going. If you didn't act, you died. And then somehow along the way, we were able to, of course, skipping many steps, but we learned
them.
to somehow along the way, we learned how to imitate each other. And so now, instead of the progression of life occurring essentially through death, and the only way for better modes of behavior to continue is through the passing of genes. Well, now we have images because when you can imitate someone, you're generating an image in your mind. And then we somehow were able to communicate those images through perhaps artistic creations or through reenactments, through telling embodied ritualistic stories. We're able to speed up that process of learning. And so and then from there you get more explicit forms, you get philosophy, and then you get written literature. And then now when I'm raising my child, at some point when he understands language, he will also be watching and imitating me, but I can just tell him this is how you play basketball. And now obviously again you still have to show him and it's embodied, but that more abstract level of knowledge helps speed up our capacity to move forward. But now with AI and with what you're talking about, it's like, what is that next level, right? Like, what is, it's something with language, it's something with imagery, but what does that next level look like? I think it's beyond me right now.
Think we get to a point where we all have a common enough idea of what's going on to not need a language to communicate. Like, there has to be a standard. Like, it's gonna take a long time. I don't expect this happens in our lifetime. But I think ideally what we're talking about, so my big whole theory with this is that the Tower of Babel, at some point in time, humanity could communicate telepathically. If not telepathically, it was body language and mannerisms. We didn't really have to physically yammer. And then eventually we lost track of this understanding. Something shifted the way that the world worked enough that we no longer could use or trust this form of communication. And we created a language. This is the whole Tower of Babel incident, the whole 200 angels coming down, teaching humanity magic, the Nephilim. All of this happened at some point in time in humanity. This is when government comes in. This is where money comes in. This is where everything that we know about human society starts. I think, and this is my theory, this is just my little headcanon, that at some point we're going to return back to slowly realizing how much these things that we use to build civilization are out of natural order, for lack of a better term. But we have to figure out how to communicate without them first.
So in some sense, the systems of knowledge that we develop, let's say the linguistic capabilities, to the degree that they are out of alignment with nature, they are towers of Babel, would you say?
Basically, they are. So the idea here is that we have, mm, we've created our separation from nature by trying to define it instead of accepting it. This is the whole spiritual theory out here is that there's an idea that goes back to the question you were asking about the Adam and Eve thing, that us trying to overly identify certain aspects of nature as what the knowledge of good and evil is. Like, there is an idea of certain knowledge that we deal in as a species now that has separated us from divinity. And that's why I say it's a theory. I haven't quite I've been going that's why I get into esoteric studies, is like, what is that linchpin that separates us from spirit? And I can't really get past anything but language, culture, and just the physical vessel and its own habits, and taking the time to refine the vessel to want to be connected to the divine.
And then my last question, in your mind, is the divine and nature similar?
Nature is a product of the divine. It's a creation of it. It's the result of divine thinking.
Makes sense to me. Dog, you got any last words, man?
No, man, I just enjoyed the banter today, dog. I have a lot of things that I want to ramble out on, but we'll be here for hours. So we're gonna go ahead and cut it out, and we'll figure out what we want to talk about next show. I appreciate everybody that take time to watch this, and good day to everybody, and all that good job.
Sounds good. Appreciate you, man. Good talk.
I sound like an old man job.
Man. All right. Until next
All
time.
right, boss.